So welcome guys to the YIPA Youth Day in collaboration with Your Fave Corporate Space. We've already heard from Euphonik, and we will now be welcoming Ms. Sonja De Bruyn. She has a lot of experience, over 22 years in mergers and acquisitions, both locally and internationally. She also holds an LLB degree from the London School of Economics, as well as an MA in economics from McGill University in Montreal. We'll allow her to introduce herself because I haven't done a great justice in that, but we look forward to learning from her today. We're also joined by the chairman of YIPA, Munedi, who is also in the Zoom call. But before we get into the conversation, welcome to both Ms. Sonja De Bruyn and Munedi. Ms. Sonja De Bruyn, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you studied, and what you do today?
Okay. Hi, Grace. Hi, Munedi. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you for including me in your celebrations for today. It's so important to mark these occasions. When one thinks back to the youth of June 16, 1976, and the sacrifices that they made, you think of our heroes, such as Hector Peterson, who died at the hands of white apartheid policemen during the student protests in Soweto. And it's so reminiscent of what the world is facing now, this moment, when we're all protesting because of, the killing of George Floyd, again at the hands of a white policeman in Minneapolis. So I really congratulate you and commend you for making sure that days like this don't go unmarked, and also to all of you for mobilizing the youth so that we can enjoy the freedoms better. Because of the sacrifices that others made. So thank you so much for the warm invitation. With regards to my background, you've been very kind in highlighting, some of the career from the last 24 years. And after I finished my legal studies with the LLB, coming back to South Africa, I realized that really, in as much as we would have a beautiful constitution and Bill of Rights, and people could vote, as Black people for the first time we could vote, those would be meaningless if we weren't able to exercise those rights. And economic empowerment and economic freedom was what was going to be the next important frontier for us, so that we could exercise those rights and live out our lives. And that's the reason I then applied to do a master's in economics and business. And after that, went into investment banking, because I really thought that's where big decisions about our economy, about transactions, about developmental projects took place. And after 7 years in investment banking, was able to join Women's Development Bank Investment Holdings, WDBIH, and that's where we undertook transactions on a proprietary basis for a broad-based trust. I felt the 7 years I'd spent at Deutsche Bank prior had given me sufficient of a toolkit, enough of a toolkit to be able to make a broader contribution. Because during my time at Deutsche, I was fortunate enough not only to work in the Joburg office, looking at transactions even in other African countries, but also worked in the London office, and from London was sent to the Tokyo office, then back to the London office, and then back to Joburg. So I felt fortunate to have that experience to be able to contribute in a more developmental context at WDBIH. And after 5 years there till 2008, then with some partners, founded Identity Partners, which is a women-led investment company based in Johannesburg, also undertaking proprietary investments. But in the last 4 years or so, we've also started conducting corporate finance advisory through Identity Advisors. I have 2 partners who run that business. And also 4 years ago, started chairing the mid-market fund at Ethos, which is one of the newest strategies of Ethos Private Equity. I don't know if you're familiar with Ethos, but it's one of the leading private equity firms in South Africa, definitely the leading firm of a South African heritage. Some of the other firms are foreign firms. And the time at Ethos was really to learn more about private equity specifically, because of the ambition we have as Identity Partners to also undertake private equity activities. And to that end, in 2018, we got a license to manage our own funds under an entity called Identity Fund Managers. And the first transaction we concluded through Identity Fund Managers platform was for Identity Property Fund, which was the acquisition of the campus, the Dimension Data campus you may be familiar with, which is in Bryanston. So that was last year. And that's one of the reasons I was very pleased to be able to to make your invitation, because our first deal on the fund management side was in the property fund.
May I ask quickly, was the Dimension Data deal a sale and leaseback?
Yes, it was. And it was on the basis of long-term leases that we were then able to raise the funding to be able to make the purchase.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And as you know, the property space is tough right now, especially the office property space.
I think it's been very, very incredible to hear so much about your journey, particularly as someone who has studied law and is continuing to study law. It's nice to see how you've made a mark in so many different industries, and it is very, very inspirational to hear your story. But speaking more about your story, can you tell us a bit about how you discovered your calling, and what are some of the main highlights on the journey to becoming the person that you are today?
Yes. So Grace, that's a good question. And I think I sort of gave a hint of that when I said earlier that the realization that, notwithstanding having studied in LLB, that even with, you know, excellent rights enshrined legally in our country, what would that mean for the actual impact on the day-to-day lives of our people? And so maybe it wasn't so much a calling, or perhaps I didn't realize it as such, but it was the acknowledgement that the next frontier for activists would have to be in the economic space. And therefore, you know, we need to equip ourselves, we need to make our way into those spaces. And today in corporates, as you're aware, there's a lot of dialogue around enabling more gender diversity, more racial diversity and inclusion. Whether it's a South African corporate or international corporates all over the world are grappling with those issues. I think we were very fortunate that because we were coming out of apartheid, we were forced to grapple with those issues much earlier on. And so, you know, from the mid-90s, already in South Africa, we were quite verbal about the issues which today you can see there's an understanding that systemic racism exists all over the world and needs to be addressed. And that women haven't had a seat at the table. And so fortunately, with, you know, us being aware of what the next frontiers need to be for each and every one of us, I always encourage people to not underestimate the power of activism wherever you are, whether you're a student, whether you're a young entrepreneur, whether you're a young professional or mid-career. Every position that you find yourself in offers you an opportunity for activism and to push the right agenda. An example of that, which, you know, I find usually quite motivating for myself, is being able to sit on the boards of listed companies in South Africa, because we still don't have enough women participating at board level. And within those board discussions, making sure that we ask the right questions and we don't become complacent just by the fact that you're present there, you know, that these things are being addressed. So it may not be as an explicit a calling, you know, as perhaps a medical doctor always knew that they wanted to heal people, or, you know, a priest or a nun always had a calling in terms of a spiritual life, but it's acknowledging those concerns or hankerings or yearnings that you have to help to make things better, or to push forward an agenda that you know is worthwhile.
I think that is so true. For you, what are the 3 things you would tell your younger self today? If you knew what you knew today, what are the 3 things you tell your younger self?
Really, honestly, okay, maybe the first would be perhaps not to be so serious when I was much younger, to have more fun, because I think it's when you're at university and when you're in that stage of life that you really can afford to do things for fun. Study the courses that you want to study for fun, because, you know, eventually life is going to get serious anyway. So if you wanted to study philosophy, or you wanted to study the history of art, when are you ever gonna, you know, get another occasion to be able to do that? Perhaps another thing I would have done is, one of my regrets is not knowing enough South African languages, you know, because I grew up in exile. we only came to South Africa sort of when I back to South Africa when I was in my early 20s. And fortunately, wherever we were in an exile community, we were amongst South Africans. But the diversity when I got home, you know, realizing a full range of South African languages, that's something which I feel like I missed out on in my childhood.
How many languages can you speak now?
Well, you know, it's embarrassing to say that English and French are the languages I speak the best. Mind you, French is the second most prevalent language in Africa. And then in South Africa, just a smattering of Xhosa, my dad's mother tongue, isiXhosa, and Afrikaans. My mom speaks some Afrikaans. And then greetings in isiZulu and Sesotho and so forth.
Would you say the international languages helped you progress further?
Look, not necessarily. You know, working somewhere like London, and I'm sure you've got members, you know, who've lived in other places. It's very cosmopolitan. So everyone has a story. There's Russians, Italians, you know, Spanish. So it's like the nice thing about it is that you feel less conscious about being black or being a woman because everybody's from somewhere. Everyone's got a story. So I enjoyed that aspect, but I wouldn't necessarily say, look, in terms of legal agreements, so studying the law and Latin roots, as you know, a lot of the law has Latin roots. So yes, that has been helpful because it's common both to French and to English. But no, not necessarily Monedi, and probably because I've made my home South Africa for, you know, ever since I started working. So that's been my base, yeah.
So
sorry, I must say, sorry, it's a smart question because I haven't been asked it often, so I'm not used to thinking this through. But if I think about some of the transactions I've worked on, then I think you're right. From a culturalization point of view, where we've worked with either foreign investors, either on inward investments, or navigating on behalf of clients in another territory. Or for example, when I was living in Japan, you know, I didn't speak Japanese, but maybe it helped that you had another culturalization in your head.
Yes.
And even now, some of the partnerships that we have, we are part of an entity that owns the only train manufacturing facility in Africa. It's in Ekurhuleni. The factory was opened 2 years ago by our president, Ramaphosa. And the OEM there, the main manufacturers are actually a French company called Alstom. They're leaders globally in manufacturing trains. So you can imagine with that partnership, there are a lot of cultural issues that we face from time to time. Yeah.
What's the third thing that you would tell your younger self?
I thought that was the third thing that you asked me. I think the third thing would be to be about following your gut and following your instincts, and not necessarily believing that it belongs in another domain, like in your home domain or in your relationships domain, that your gut and instinct are equally applicable in business and in the boardroom. And perhaps as women, we tend to discount those more natural factors. You know, perhaps men accept it more as their full armory that they bring to the table. And so I would encourage not to discount that small little voice that you hear from time to time.
Thank you.
Is that okay, Monedi, if I ticked all your 3 boxes?
As we know, in this time, many businesses have been affected by the pandemic. It's forced a lot of businesses to close down or to downscale their business operation. In your experience, how has COVID-19 impacted your business and entrepreneurial strategy? And can you share the 3 key lessons you've learned in this time?
Okay, so I don't know if you guys have seen that meme It's got 3 options about who has helped you execute your digital strategy the best or the quickest. And one is like your head of IT, and the other one was like, you know, your consultants, McKinsey or Bain or whoever, and the third one was the COVID. And obviously the COVID has helped all of us really accelerate a digital strategy and make sure that people can work from home effectively and so forth. Fortunately, our business is more of like a professional services firm. We don't have actual operations or like manufacturing plants that people need to go to every day. So the shift to working from home was quite seamless. And in as much as, you know, we appreciate that fact, it's obviously scary for us also being on the landlord side, because we're also property owners, where you start to realize that people more and more will have less reasons to be physically located at offices, and then when they are at offices, that for the office designed to be sort of for physical distancing. So we've managed to cope, fortunately, sort of in terms of our primary business. In terms of our portfolio companies, we found that where we're partnered with companies that are multinationals, some of them have so far still been a little bit buffered because they're part of a global multinational. But you all know what the forecasts are for dampened growth in South Africa, -7, -10. You know, there's different forecasts from different houses. So clearly over the next 2 to 3 years, GDP growth is going to be highly impacted. And so on the demand side for all businesses, you know, there's bound to be an impact. So what our approach is really to conserve and maintain our current position. I don't think we're going to be very active in terms of the acquisition side. And clearly the advice to our portfolio companies is for them to preserve cash. Everybody needs to be in a cash preservation mode. And where people have banking facilities or you know, major senior debt, if those businesses are leveraged, then they need to watch the breaching of any covenants or getting themselves into any situations that can become very serious very quickly. So what we found is we've had to have much higher, more frequent communication with portfolio companies. We sort of call them COVID-19, you know, meetings. So whereas before you may have had monthly meetings or board meetings quarterly, right at the beginning you were probably having weekly meetings. I mean, obviously all virtual, just to make sure you know, things are going okay. And then when the lockdown was starting to be lifted, to make sure that people were going back to work safely and adhering to the regulations and the guidelines. And I do think it's a new normal. I think you guys are actually very fortunate that you're quite adaptable in your generation. You're already digitally savvy. And I think you're kind of living through probably one of the worst recessions we're going to see. So everything from here on is going to be upside.
I definitely agree. I think many of us have learned to adapt and to find ways in which we can do better, because I was on a call with Jian Chang the other day and he said he doesn't think we'll ever go back to normal. So I think as young people, we're learning to navigate and see how we can move forward and do better as we move forward. And speaking of young people, this is obviously Youth Day. And as I said, many young people are really questioning what's going to happen in the future and what they can do. From your perspective, what are the challenges and opportunities that you foresee for a young entrepreneurial person in South Africa, considering the impact of this virus on unemployment rates?
Yeah. So I would say for young people, firstly, you know, all the good advice, good sage advice that you used to get from older people in the past about savings and investing and not spending unnecessarily, etc. I think all the more so in an environment like this. We're fortunate that we probably don't have to use our cars as frequently as we used to. We're not able to travel internationally as much as we might like to, or go on holiday. So those are all opportunities to save. I mean, really, you know, there is that blessing. And then if you can, whether you have a bond on a house or any other debt, you know, start to pay that off as quickly as you can with the areas where you are able to save now. Challenges on the job front, yes. But I think just as a society, we need to make sure that that doesn't pivot us into too much of a self-preservation mode. And when people are in that mode, then we're thinking more selfishly. We're not thinking with a mindset of generosity. which is actually what society needs right now. We're not thinking with a mindset of kindness, which is actually what society needs right now. And so we probably all will need to work harder and smarter in our own ways, but that should be driven more by wanting to succeed and coming out of this, as opposed to driven by fear or a mode of being in self-preservation. Those would be some of my immediate observations, and not knowing, if we're speaking to an entrepreneurial audience or a professional audience more specifically.
And before we end, we would like to know if you have any special message for the youth to inspire them as they continue with courage during this very uncertain time.
Yeah, I think, one of the things I think similar to what I said before, we cannot underestimate the importance of this moment, like these past 2 weeks specifically, And yes, it's happening during the time of the COVID, so maybe it's more heightened. But the change that needs to happen, we are at that tipping point if we're not already tipped over into it. And so wherever we are, we should never underestimate the potential impact of our actions, of our words on the people around us, whether it's in a small business or a large, more established business, and for us to amplify these voices for change. So that would be my hopefully words of inspiration, understanding that through difficulty and through a crisis, there are these opportunities that arise, and we should grab them with both hands.
Yeah, thank you so much, firstly, Ms. Sonja De Bruyn, for joining us on our YIPA Youth Day in collaboration. I've absolutely loved learning from you, and we look forward to seeing the many, many things that you do.